Let me use the mic. There we go. I'm so glad to be here right now because it's not every day that we get to be in the presence of somebody that has been named as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum.
Okay.
Woo! So just to get background about Earl. Earl is a senior product marketing manager for Azure, currently working for Microsoft. He is the co-author of the book Startup Mindsets, a Blueprint to Thrive in an Innovation-Driven and Globally Connected World. He is the co-founder of Plentina, an AI and FinTech startup in the credit and robo-advisory space. In addition, he spent his time on the tech side of Wall Street in the data team of Bridgewater Associates and also of Charles Schwab. He is a leader in the Southeast Asian startup ecosystem where he co-founded IdeaSpace, the leading incubator and accelerator based in Manila, and QBO, the innovation center of the Philippines. Some of his investments includes Coins.ph, one of the first crypto exchanges in the Philippines and Thailand. For his contributions to the emerging market innovation, he was honored by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader. That is a major thing. So I'd like to welcome everybody. Earl, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. This is an amazing group, so I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Good. I have a question because Ray Dalio is one of my favorite people.
Oh yeah, of course.
And for those that are not familiar, Ray Dalio was the co-founder. Is he still the chairman?
Yeah, no, he just stepped down, but he's
The founder of Bridgewater Associates. And Bridgewater Associates is the largest algorithmic trading hedge fund, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, you said something in your keynote about a risk profile. What made you decide to make the jump from Bridgewater Associates to having a startup?
So my wife asked me that as well all the time.
Okay, wait. Now, was it because of the money and the comfort of living?
Yeah, so in fact, so we moved literally from Westport, Connecticut, which is the headquarters of Bridgewater, right? So our house is still there into Seattle. So we were surrounded by all hedge fund people. So my wife's best friends are wives of other hedge fund people, right? But for 4 or 5 years, I was transposed from, and my last job before that, I was managing director at Charles Schwab, and I was in San Francisco, so maybe it's an interesting story. So I was in San Francisco looking out, right? And then I saw Slack come up and a bunch of other companies. I'm like, wow, you know what? Maybe I should do this too. And I always had a dream of starting a company, but I just never had that courage, that startup mindsets, right? Especially if you're in somewhat quote unquote stable, especially a finance job, right? There's just no motivation to do that. But then one day, my friend from Stanford, who was at the time when I was in business school, he was in machine learning PhD, and he went to Google. He was a company called Bump, which became Google Photos, and then he was in Google's AI team for 5-6 years. And he called me up and said, you know what, Earl, remember we talked about this when we were in school, when we were just like in our 20s with literally net worth of 0. We always thought that we wanted to do something for emerging markets. And guess what? I'm leaving Google tomorrow. Do you want to join me? And I was excited, but also scared at the same time because I knew I wanted to say yes, but I was scared of basically not sure if this was the right decision for me and my family. But ultimately, another practical thing that I did, maybe this is it's an interesting practical thing. I always thought that at some point in my life I'll start a company, but I knew I needed a little bit of buffer fund for my family. So I had and tucked in it's called an FU fund, right? Basically like at some point I'm gonna start a company and I'm gonna leave whatever job I have and I'll have 6 months of burn for my family to survive. So for 5 years or maybe more, I've been just tucking away money every month to be sure that at some point I will be ready. And the good thing is that I had that, right? So that was like in the end of 2019. Funny enough, what happened in March 2020, the world collapsed, right, because of COVID. So I was questioning my life during that time.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I knew I had a little bit of buffer in order to start a company. But why I did that? Because that same question I had is what matters to me most. And I said, if I had to create opportunity through what I know, which is technology and data, in order to hopefully unlock more financial services in a place like the Philippines and Vietnam and other emerging markets, and I had the chance to do it with a friend of mine who is also a world expert in AI, like, why wouldn't I do it? So it's more of like those timing and then alignment of mission. And then ultimately, I was just also ready to do it. Like those three things combined made me take the leap, right? Was it the best financial thought or investment? Like, of course not. But sometimes in life, you just have to do something that just doesn't make any logic, but you just know inside of you just have to do. And I think most of us as founders, that's the way that you have to think, right? Because ultimately, it's just easier, less risky, and better if you just, let's say, go to Microsoft or Amazon or Google and hang out, right? And being a founder, to be honest, who would go to a place where you know that 99% of companies fail after 2 or 3 years? It's just illogical. But you do it anyway because you want to do something meaningful for the world, and you only have so much years of your life that you want to use it for.
Yeah.
So those are like the kind of interesting logical things, but it's logical, but to be honest, if you talk maybe outside this room, it's super illogical, right?
Absolutely. So it seems as if you said timing, alignment, and
Readiness. I mean, basically like financial readiness, mental readiness, right? All of these things have to play a role.
So after you started, and this was Plentina, correct? Yep. Now you started Plentina, you got your 6 months of money ready to go, you've had that conversation with your wife, then what?
And then COVID happened, right? Yeah, it's funny because another thing to being founders, you're just hyper idealistic, but ultimately you have to also be a little bit more pragmatic, right? So me and my co-founder, we had a timeline of ourselves, and in the end was a skull and crossbones of this is the end. If we don't get any outside funding, this would be the end of it, right? So that also gives us a forcing function. So we just kept on talking about customer discovery, but not like we just kept on pitching to people, talking about our vision. And our first angel investor ultimately was the family that owned 7-Eleven in the Philippines, but actually it's the second or third largest 7-Eleven network in the world, right? And they said, you know what, Earl, whatever this credit score concept that you and my co-founder's name Kevin thought about, we don't want that. It doesn't really create any business for us. But if you change this a little bit, we might be interested to pilot this. And we're like, literally that night we didn't sleep. We made a website, we made a prototype, and then we showed it to the CIO of 7-Eleven the next day. And that was, I think, January. And then February, that same person who was our first angel investor was flying to Dallas for the, 7-Eleven Global Leadership Council or whatever. And he went to San Francisco and he said, Earl, whatever you're doing, you and Kevin are doing in this data side, it's so interesting. I just sold one of our business units. I have some money to invest. I can be your first angel investor. And we basically got our first check. That was February or March. So it took us a little bit of time. But that was like, I think 4 weeks before the skull and crossbones, like when we just give up on this dream. So ultimately, I think the most important thing is like, you just have to do whatever it takes in order for your company to survive, but at the same time, be practical on like, when is the dream gonna end? And that helps you have a sense of urgency in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. After Plentina, what'd you do next?
Yeah, so I mean, we just sold Plentina early this year, and then I promised my wife that I will have a little bit more stability for 3 to 4 years, and until my 2 eldest kids go to college, right? So again, it's all about timing too, right? For 5 years or so, no weekends, 24 hours working, like most of you probably as founders, right? So that's like a give and get, right? So more of that, and then now basically, so making sure the next 3 to 4 years focused on startup advising, maybe some investing, and then working on cloud and AI in Microsoft, and then maybe after that go back again to the rodeo. But I'm clearing that with my wife again. But she knows after high school I'll start another company most likely.
What's your favorite part of the ecosystem? Is it being a founder? Is it being an investor? Is it being an advisor?
I've been all of them, right? That's the funny thing. Again, most of the people here are founders, right? You know, what I enjoy the most is, for me, it's not even like anything else, but seeing things from like 0 to 1 is so exciting, right? Because most of the time, it's really a place where, you know, I see things being built from scratch. And I'm an engineer by training, so I'm an aerospace engineer by training. I know here's aerospace engineers, maybe some of you. And why I went to engineering is because I think the beauty about startups is like you literally create something out of nothing, right? An idea in your head becomes a product in a company. That's magic, right? So I took a philosophy class, I think, in first year college, and they said that the difference between humans and animals is that we can create, right? We can create something out of nothing from imagination, right? So it's super exciting to do that, and that's something that I always like to do. Being an investor, as I mentioned in my talk, the hardest part is fundraising your fund, right? Deploying the capital and saying no is a bit easy, right? Like you say no. Actually, the hardest part for me as an entrepreneur, but then as an investor at the time, is saying no to people. You have to say no 99 times, invest in one. It's so hard, so heartbreaking, right? Being a founder is the total reverse. You get said no 99 times, right? And then you might get one, right? But ultimately, I think what's more exciting for me actually is like if you're a founder, you control your destiny, but your destiny could be like either you do or you don't do well. And it's all up to you. And the hardest part though, being founder, it's super lonely, right? It's very difficult because ultimately no one can relate to the challenges that daily you have to change. Like today you think about fundraising, tomorrow it's about HR and payroll benefits, right? You have to think about that. You have to think about what if your best employee got poached by another startup or wanted to just have a more stable job. Like literally there's so much stuff happening in your mind. But to be honest, I wouldn't trade the world for all of these interesting things because it's like you're problem solving every day, which is cool. So.
Okay. All right. We have you at Bridgewater and at these major hedge funds. Then you go to having your own startup, and then you go into the investing space. And can you help me understand how you go from that to becoming an advisor for the president of the Philippines? I think that's incredible.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I grew up in Manila most of my life. So I was born in California, but I grew up in Manila most of my life.
Where in California?
I was born in the Valley of California.
Where in the Valley of California?
Called Granada Hills.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's one of these places where it's cool actually. The beach cities get more love in LA, right?
Absolutely.
But the Valley, I think it's its own character. Yeah, the LA Valley. So they say the Valley in San Fernando Valley. Yeah,
the San Fernando Valley. So
you have to cross this. So my philosophy. So I went to 2 years of college in the Philippines, and what was very transformational to me was, so I did engineering, and I grew up relatively in like an upper middle class environment. But then all of a sudden, I saw that my classmates who did better than me was sons of fishermen and taxi drivers and others, right? And I totally remember my first week. I said, "What are you guys going to do on Friday? Are you going to watch a movie and whatnot?" And they looked at me and said, "No, I have to work in the market." Right? And guess what? That same people got 95% in the exam and I got 75. Right? So I realized at a young age that access is the only way that most people in the world, in order for them to change the destiny of their family tree. My grandfather was the same thing, right? My grandfather was a janitor, went to engineering college, and then he built a company, right? And even if he died, he paid for my undergrad. Interesting enough, so I said, if this is the case, how do I dedicate my life in order to provide access to more people? And I just been consistent. So that's something that at least I was lucky. I built, again, the first accelerator and venture fund in the Philippines. I was head of innovation of one of the largest companies at 29. And then just continued to give back. And then when the president was saying, okay, who should I call to basically be like my first appointee from the business sector to advise me in innovation, I guess a couple of people nominated me, and lo and behold, I was supposed to decline because I was so busy, but then my dad said, very few times a country of 100 million people need your help.
Yeah.
And I said, why not? So that's what happened. And yeah, so now I go to the Philippines 3 or 4 times a year to basically think about the innovation policy of the country, right?
So what are the, oh, Ron is telling
Question.
us.
Oh, time.
He's
Time.
telling
Okay.
me that I'm getting a little too verbose.
Maybe I'm verbose.
You know what I will do is I'm going to open it up to questions from our audience. Do we have any questions from our audience?
You were talking about, I guess, wanting to democratize, I guess, the Silicon Valley ecosystem, but as well as change things within that kind of ecosystem, so it wouldn't be the old boys club. Or I guess, what changes would you like to bring to the Seattle ecosystem, and what would you like to maintain here in Seattle, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's why, right? What is an ecosystem, right? It's knowledge, it's capital, it's support, and then ultimately it's also the founders, right? So I think ultimately that's one thing I wanted to. When Ron introduced me to venture mechanics, I was so inspired because ultimately I think that's what Seattle needs, right? It's really a support ecosystem for people who want to start something and then ultimately have both the financial and also talent-wise have places where they can scale their idea. And I think that's something that, to be honest, Seattle should be probably a top 2 tech ecosystem in the world. But for some reason, statistically, we maybe per capita is like how we frame it now. It's like per capita, we have the most startups, I think, or one of the most startups in the world. But ultimately, it's also about quantity. And the quantity means that I can actually see other people in the same journey as me, right? So that's one thing I hope that we bring in, is this sense of community, that we can help each other in order for us to create, again, my challenge a while ago, like each other's role models, right? If someone gets funding, how did you do it? Let's exchange that information, right? If someone figures out how to make a partnership, let's say one of the big Fortune 500 companies, how did you do it? I think that knowledge just has to come in very fast among us in order for the Seattle ecosystem to just keep on chugging along, right? So that's like my general thoughts.
I was just wondering, doing a startup is really, really hard. Why do you want to come back to it again?
For those that didn't hear the question, he said, doing a startup is really difficult and challenging. Why would he want to come back to it again?
That's a question to all of you, like, why do you have a startup, right? Like, same thing. I think all of us just need to hear this, right? And someone told me this in Stanford, which is, once you're an entrepreneur, you know if you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right? You know if you're a builder, right? You know it inside of you. And if you don't be true to yourself, then you'll just be miserable, right? Yeah. But obviously there's seasons, disclaimers. There's seasons. Sometimes you build for other people, sometimes you build for yourself. But ultimately, that sense of building something out of nothing is inherent to most founders. So that's why most people come back, right? And even if it's hard or difficult or the odds are against you, there's no regrets because you're true to that. Another thing is that it's more philosophical, sort of being a bit meta, right? Ultimately, my philosophy is all of us have between 80 to 100 years in the earth. And what are you going to do with it and what impact? That's why I have this scale filter, right? What impact do you want to have before the end of your life, right? Do you want to touch 10 people? That's fine. Want to touch 100 million people? That's also fine. But as founders who are venture scale, you're like, you know what? Maybe before I die, can I impact 1 million people? Maybe 1 billion people, right? And at least that's how you're the only one who can think about that measurement. But for me, that's the same thing, right? Maybe before I die, how do I touch 1 billion people's lives? And that's the scale mindset that I want to have for my life, right? So,
Absolutely.
Thank you. I have a question. Thank you so much for being here, for one.
of course.
In my personal journey, I have sort of come across the difference between what I feel might be inspiration versus motivation.
Inspiration versus motivation. Okay.
And I'm curious if that's something you have ever felt like, well, I have the motivation to do this, but do I need that little extra boost of, well, what do I do or where do I go? And do you seek that inspiration, or do you feel them much different?
No, yeah. That's why I had a disclaimer that being a founder is the loneliest job in the world. And why? To be honest, you can't tell your employees the problems. They're going to freak out and leave, most likely.
Yeah.
You can't tell your investors what the problems are because they'll freak out too. So who are you going to say? Who are you going to talk to? Ultimately, good investors, they'll listen. They'll be like, okay, that's fine. But if they realize, oh, shoot, like the risk profile of this company is increasing exponentially, they'll get a bit nervous, right? The sense of inspiration comes from, that's why I come back to this, comes from two things. Is that question, which is the company that I built aligned to the impact I want to create ultimately in my life? And if you answer that question, that's ultimately the inspiration, because very few times in your life you'll have the chance to work on something that matters personally to you. If you work, let's say, for a big company, they don't care what's personally important to you, right? You want to say you want to help the Seattle area and change poverty. Good luck what company in the Seattle area actually aligns to what you want to do. So that's part of the inspiration, which is more personal. And the other side, from an extrinsic part, is the value of founder communities is something that you have to do. If you have to architect that either through online meetups, personal meetups, anything, you have to do that, because the only people that relate to you are other people going through almost the exact same stage as you, right? And you'll get inspiration from that because you realize you're not by yourself. So those are two parts of inspiration. One is, yes, you take a step back and you realize, wow, I'm working on something that matters to me. And the other one is like, other people are having the same shitty day as me, right? And it's normal, right?
Yeah.
So.
Last question. Oh, we're out of time?
Okay.
Then I'll go ahead and close this up. I think, Earl, thank you so much for this time. From the last final thoughts that I got from it was about, you said something very powerful, that access changes the family tree. And this is why I think environments and ecosystems like venture mechanics is so near and dear to me, because of the access that it provides to community that can actually change not only your life, but your family's life. So once again, thank you, everyone.